Hello there, and welcome back to All About Earth, where time slows, curiosity stretches its legs, and the world grows just a little quieter around you. Tell me, where are you right now? Maybe you're curled under a warm blanket, the kind that feels like a small personal glacier melting slowly into comfort. Or maybe you're on a soft couch, listening to the hum of morning light through your window. Or perhaps, if you're one of the wild ones, you're outdoors beneath a pale autumn sky, 10:28 a.m. October 22nd, 25, watching the clouds drift like ancient ice flows. Wherever you are, take a breath. Let the air cool as it enters, warm as it leaves. Because tonight, or this morning, we're not staying in the present. We're going to travel back 20,000 years to an age when the earth wore ice like armor, when continents shivered and wind carved stories into snow. This is the Pleistocene, the last great ice age. An age when giants walked the earth. Real giants, woolly mammoths, their tusks curling like frozen crescents against the tundra sky. Saber-toothed cats, with teeth like polished ivory blades, silent as moonlight. Ground sloths that could tower above a man, and herds of bison, horses, and mastodons moving in slow thunder across the frost. Imagine standing there, your breath a ghost in the air, your feet sinking into permafrost that has held secrets for millennia. The landscape stretches wide and white, but it's not empty. It hums. Every gust of wind, every crunch of snow, carries the memory of life colossal and unhurried. How did these titans live here, in a world of ice and shadow? What drove them to adapt, to thrive, and then one by one to vanish? That's the story we'll walk beside tonight. But for now, just linger at the edge of that frozen horizon. Close your eyes and you might hear it, the deep rhythmic sound of mammoth footsteps fading into the wind. They were here long before us, shaping the land with their passage, their bones now resting under layers of time. If this journey into ancient Earth stirs something in you, some quiet wonder, some small tug of curiosity, feel free to leave a trace of your own, a like, a share, a word, because every gesture helps this gentle exploration reach another dreamer, another wanderer wrapped in their blanket, wondering about the giants who came before. So, settle in. Let the present blur. The snow is falling again, and the age of giants is calling. We'll step carefully across the frozen bridge of time together. The Ice Age did not arrive all at once. It crept, slow as breath on a mirror, until the world found itself glazed in cold. The Pleistocene epoch, stretching from about 2.6 million to 11,700 years ago, was an age sculpted by ice and silence. Great rivers of frozen water carved valleys deeper than any plough could reach. Glaciers sprawled across the northern continents, thick as mountains themselves, grinding rock into dust and pushing the boundaries of life toward the edges of endurance. Imagine looking down at Earth from space during that time. White crowns covered the poles, stretching down over North America, Europe, and Asia. The Laurentide ice sheet draped across what is now Canada and the northern United States, while another immense glacier, the Fennoscandian, gleamed across northern Europe. Between these frozen empires, the land sank beneath the weight of ice, and the seas receded. Global sea levels dropped by more than 100 meters, exposing vast continental shelves that had once been hidden beneath the waves. Land bridges appeared, paths that animals and early humans would later use to wander between continents. The air itself was thinner, sharper, the planet's breath slowed. Dust storms swept across cold plains, carrying particles ground fine by the glaciers' endless motion. The atmosphere was dry, the sun pale, and yet beneath this cold, austere sky, life thrived, strange, resilient, enormous life. Where ice retreated, tundra bloomed. Picture an endless sea of grass and moss, silver green beneath a low sun. This was the Mammoth Steppe, the greatest biome Earth has ever known, stretching unbroken from Spain to Siberia, from Alaska to the Yukon. Wind rippled through it like water. Herds of shaggy beasts moved across the horizon in numbers so great the ground itself might seem to breathe. It was a land built for endurance, for migration, for thick fur and steady hearts. The mammoths were its monarchs. Mammothus primigenius, the woolly mammoth, roams these plains in herds, their great curved tusks tracing arcs against the snow. Each adult stood over 3 meters tall, blanketed in dense brown hair that shimmered faintly with frost. Beneath that coat, layers of fat and muscle insulated them against cold that could split stone. They carried with them a sense of quiet patience, of beings built to outlast winter itself. When they walked, the earth seemed to sigh. Their diet was simple: grasses, sedges, herbs, but their migrations were immense, their memories deep, their world bound by wind and ice. Beside them, shaggy rhinoceroses lumbered through the tundra. Collodonta antiquitatis, the woolly rhino, their horns were long and flattened, sweeping forward like the blades of ancient scythes, perfect for scraping away snow in search of the frozen grass beneath. They were not graceful creatures, but they were magnificent, living fortresses wrapped in fur. Predators followed, as they always do, drawn to the promise of flesh and warmth. In the shadows of the steppe, the saber-toothed cat prowled, Smilodon fatalis, with fangs like ivory daggers curving down from its jaw. Each tooth was longer than a man's hand, yet fragile if misused, designed not for chewing but for precision, to strike deep into the throat of its prey. Its body was compact and powerful, built for ambush, for the sudden rush from concealment when the mammoth calf or ancient bison strayed too far from safety. Imagine meeting those golden eyes in the half-light of a glacial dawn, watching the creature move like a ripple through tall grass. Soundless, certain, beautiful in its lethality. But the saber-toothed cat was not alone. The steppe was home to other hunters too. The dire wolf, heavier and broader than its modern cousin, with jaws capable of crushing bone. They hunted in packs that moved like storms across the tundra, coordinated and relentless. Their howls would have rolled over the plains like wind through ice cracks, an eerie sound in a frozen world. In North America, these wolves followed the herds of ancient bison, stalking them across the snowfields, their tracks weaving into the same paths that mammoths and early humans walked. And then there was the short-faced bear Arctodus simus, the towering terror of the Pleistocene. Standing more than 3.5 meters tall on its hind legs, it was one of the largest terrestrial carnivores ever to live. It could outrun a horse and smell prey from miles away, yet even this beast, with its immense frame and terrible strength, lived within the rhythm of the Ice Age, hunting when it could, scavenging when it must, existing as part of a world ruled by endurance. In the south, where the cold softened into temperate woodlands, another colossus lumbered through the forests, the megatherium, the giant ground sloth. It was an unlikely creature, slow, deliberate, almost contemplative in its movements. When it stood upright to reach the branches above, it could tower over an elephant. Its claws, long and curved, could strip bark or defend against predators. To see one was to glimpse something that seemed half plant, half mountain, alive, but moving at the speed of stone. Across the open plains of North America, herds of ancient horses galloped through the frost, their hooves hammering frozen soil, while massive bison, the ancestors of those that still roam today, moved like living tides. Musk oxen grazed along icy rivers, their coats so thick they seemed sculpted from clouds. The ecosystem pulsed with balance. The grazers fed the land, the predators thinned the herds, the cold sculpted them all, and far to the south, in the distant lands of Australia, the Pleistocene shaped giants of its own. There, beneath the southern stars, lived Diprotodon, the largest marsupial to ever exist. Imagine a wombat scaled up to the size of a rhinoceros, weighing nearly 3 tons. They wandered the ancient outback in small herds, browsing on shrubs and leaves, their heavy feet pressing deep into the red earth. Their world was not of ice, but of droughts and cool nights, where giant kangaroos bounded across the plains and flightless birds, the thunderbirds, cast long shadows over the sand. The same epoch that froze the north baked the south, yet both extremes produced the same outcome: life grown large, life adapted, life magnificent. Even in the coldest heart of winter, the world was never still. The ice advanced and retreated in cycles that spanned tens of thousands of years. During glacial peaks, the planet glittered under sheets of frozen water that reached miles thick. During the warmer interglacial periods, the ice melted back, revealing new rivers and valleys, reshaping coastlines and habitats. It was a planet in motion, breathing in and out through the rhythm of climate. The ecosystems that arose in these intervals were rich and dynamic. In Europe, reindeer and steppe bison shared space with mammoths, while cave lions larger than modern lions prowled the rocky uplands. In South America, glyptodonts, enormous armadillo-like creatures encased in bony armor, rolled across the plains. The diversity of life was astonishing, not despite the cold, but because of it. Harshness refined survival. It sharpened evolution's tools. Yet the Pleistocene was not merely a time of beasts, it was a crucible for change, for adaptation. The humans who lived then, Homo erectus, Neanderthals, and eventually Homo sapiens, watched these giants with awe and fear. They painted their likenesses on cave walls, recorded their power in ochre and charcoal. To them, the mammoth was both a source of food and a god of the tundra. The Ice Age shaped not just the Earth's surface, but the human imagination. The light during those millennia had a particular quality, soft, almost metallic. When the sun hung low, it cast long shadows across the snow, turning mammoth herds into silhouettes that drifted like clouds across the plain. The nights were deep and crystalline. The aurora danced above the ice sheets, green and violet, flickering across the silence of a planet half asleep. Beneath that frozen dome, life persisted. Every breath of steam from a grazing bison, every crunch of hoof or claw, was an act of defiance against the cold. Even the sea was different then. With so much water locked in ice, coastlines stretched far beyond their modern limits. The Bering Land Bridge connected Asia and North America, and across it moved waves of creatures, mammoths, muskoxen, wolves, and the first humans following their trail. The continents were closer in that frozen dawn, not just in geography, but in the shared language of survival. And yet, for all its harshness, there was beauty. The Ice Age was not barren but breathtaking. The air smelled of snow and crushed stone. The skies were sharp with stars. Mountains glistened with glaciers that caught the light like prisms. In spring, even the tundra came alive. Patches of moss and wildflowers bursting through melting snow, feeding insects which fed birds, which fed foxes. Life found its rhythm even in the heart of ice. To stand in the Pleistocene would be to understand the word resilience in its truest form. Every creature that breathed did so against the odds. Every heartbeat was a rebellion against the cold. Yet for hundreds of thousands of years, it worked. The balance held, the giants ruled. From the mammoth steppes of Eurasia to the frozen plains of North America, from the subglacial forests of Europe to the sunburned expanses of Ice Age Australia, Earth was alive in a way that seems almost impossible now, vast, wild, untamed. The planet had wrapped itself in ice, and life had responded not with retreat, but with grandeur. Close your eyes and picture it. A herd of woolly mammoths crossing a snowy ridge, their shadows stretching across the pale morning. The air hums with wind. A saber-toothed cat watches from afar, silent as stone. The breath of the earth rises and falls. The Ice Age was not merely cold, it was luminous. A frozen canvas painted with motion, survival, and grace. The world spoke in whispers then, and those whispers still echo faintly beneath our feet, in the fossils, in the frozen soils, in the ancient DNA locked away in permafrost. The Pleistocene was a season of giants, a time when the earth, in all her chill and splendor, reminded us that life does not vanish in the face of hardship. It adapts. It grows thick fur, longer tusks, sharper claws. It keeps walking, slow and steady, across the tundra, leaving behind footprints in snow that even now have not quite melted from memory. Why does life grow large? Why does the earth, again and again through the ages, give rise to creatures of impossible scale, beasts that seem carved, not from bone and sinew, but from myth itself? The story of gigantism is not one of sudden leaps, but of slow and deliberate unfolding, an evolutionary whisper that says, grow. It is the tale of how life, faced with cold, hunger, and competition, found an answer in size, an answer written in muscle and bone, in patience and weight, in the quiet arithmetic of survival. To understand gigantism, you must imagine the world as a balancing act between energy and endurance, Every living thing, from the smallest insect to the greatest mammal, is a negotiation between what it can take in and what it must spend. In that equation, size can be both burden and blessing. The larger the body, the more energy it needs to maintain itself, but also the more efficiently it holds that energy once stored. A large creature loses heat more slowly, can travel farther without rest, and often survives longer between meals. For life in harsh or shifting climates, that efficiency is not luxury, it is destiny. Think of heat, that first and most constant currency of life. Small bodies shed warmth quickly. A mouse must eat constantly to fuel its tiny furnace, or its temperature plummets within hours. But a large animal, by virtue of its volume, traps heat deep within. Its surface area where warmth escapes is small compared to its mass. That simple geometric truth, the ratio of skin to body, means that size itself is insulation. To grow larger is to grow steadier, less vulnerable to the daily whim of temperature. For creatures of cold lands where wind can slice through fur like knives, bulk is armor. A giant carries its own climate within. Yet warmth alone does not explain the miracle of scale. Gigantism is also an answer to movement. Large bodies store more energy, and with long limbs and deep muscles, they can roam across vast distances. In a world of scattered resources, whether grasslands or deserts, mobility is survival. The giant's stride is an inheritance of hunger. With each step, it keeps the horizon within reach. Small creatures live within narrow maps, confined by what they can reach before exhaustion. But the large animal stretches its life across continents. It follows the rhythm of migration, tracing ancient paths carved by instinct and season. There is a rhythm to being large, a slower pulse, a measured breath. A big heart beats fewer times in a lifetime, but each beat moves rivers of blood. Large lungs pull in more air, yet the pace of breathing slows, matching the calm persistence of size. The giant does not rush, it endures. To be large is to trust in time, to accept that strength lies not in speed, but in the ability to keep moving long after others must rest. And still, size has another voice: defense. Every ecosystem is an arms race, an unending dialogue between predator and prey. When one grows sharper teeth, the other grows thicker hide. When one learns to sprint, the other learns to stand and withstand. Gigantism is one of nature's boldest answers in this ancient contest. A creature too large to be easily killed no longer needs to flee. It can stand its ground. Size turns vulnerability into presence. It makes the body into fortress and declaration at once. But evolution is rarely content with one solution. As prey grew larger, so too did the hunters. Each adaptation inspired another. Each victory reshaped the game. This slow exchange, the arms race of the ages, produced both terror and grace. Gigantism spread across lineages, not because nature loves bigness for its own sake, but because under certain conditions, being large is simply the most efficient way to exist. In biology, efficiency often masquerades as grandeur. Over time, gigantism becomes self-reinforcing. Large animals reshape the world they inhabit, and in doing so they create new conditions that favor largeness in others. When a massive creature walks across the land, it changes the soil beneath its feet. Its weight presses seeds into the ground, churns mud into meadow. Where it grazes, it clears paths for new growth. Where it rests, it leaves hollows that collect water and life. Its dung spreads seeds across miles, carrying forests in its shadow. These are not just side effects, they are ecological engineering. The giants build their own stage. In this way, gigantism is not only a survival strategy, but a sculptor of landscapes. Large creatures open ecosystems, letting light reach the ground, turning dense brush into grassland, and maintaining the cycle of growth and renewal. They are gardeners of the earth, though they never intended to be. The planet breathes differently where they walk. Every step of a giant writes a quiet geography, a reshaping of wind and soil, and the destiny of smaller lives. Even their deaths feed the world. When a massive body falls, it becomes an entire ecosystem in itself. Scavengers arrive first. Birds, insects, Smaller mammals, followed by decomposers, fungi and bacteria that return its vast stores of nutrients to the soil. In a single carcass, hundreds of species find sustenance. In death, the giant becomes the heartbeat of renewal. Thus, size influences not just how a creature lives, but how life itself continues around it. But gigantism is not easy won. It requires patience from evolution, a long corridor of stability where generations can grow incrementally larger without breaking under the cost. To evolve size, a species must balance on a razor's edge between gain and bird too small, and it is prey, too large and the energy demands become unsustainable. Somewhere in between lies the sweet spot, the golden scale where metabolism, climate, and ecology meet in harmony. That balance shifts as the planet shifts. Ice, vegetation, oxygen, temperature, all determine how big life can afford to be. When the world favors giants, it grows them like forests. When it no longer can, they vanish as silently as they arose. The mystery of gigantism, then, is not just why creatures grow large, but when the world decides it is time for them to do so. Size is not only biology, it is geology, chemistry, and climate, woven together. On a planet where warmth and cold trade power over the ages, gigantism blooms and fades like a seasonal flower. It is the Earth's way of experimenting with form, testing the boundaries of what life can carry. Even the physics of scale plays its part. Double an animal's length, and its surface area increases fourfold, but its volume and therefore its weight increases eightfold. The bones must thicken disproportionately, the muscles strengthen, the circulatory system expand. Giants must solve the engineering of themselves with every generation. Their skeletons are masterpieces of compromise, light enough to move, strong enough to hold their own gravity. The tension between those forces, mobility and mass, defines what is possible. Every large creature that ever lived was, in some sense, a triumph over mathematics. Yet gigantism is not only mechanical, it is philosophical, almost poetic. It represents life's refusal to be small in the face of limitation. To grow large is to claim space, to embody confidence in a world that changes without mercy. There's something almost meditative about it. The slow breath of a creature that knows time differently, that feels no need to rush. Perhaps that is the deepest secret of gigantism, not just survival, but serenity. In a world that burns and freezes, the giant moves with patience. It has already won by lasting. If you listen closely to the natural world, you can still hear echoes of that lesson. In the low rumble of thunder rolling across a valley, in the shadow of mountains that once were ocean floors, the earth remembers the weight of giants. Their footprints may be gone, but their influence lingers in the distribution of plants, in the migration of animals, even in the way ecosystems cycle nutrients today. Long after their bones have turned to stone, their legacy continues as structure and rhythm, the architecture of life itself. What gigantism reveals is that evolution is not just a struggle, but a collaboration between form and environment. The world invites certain possibilities, and life accepts, reshaping itself in response. Size, then, is not arbitrary. It is conversation, a dialogue between the creature and the climate, between hunger and abundance, between the pull of gravity and the will to rise against it. In that dialogue, life keeps experimenting. Sometimes it chooses smallness, speed, stealth, specialization. Other times it chooses vastness, stability, endurance, and presence. Neither is superior, both are necessary. The giant depends on the small to keep the world fertile. The small depend on the giant to keep it open and alive. This balance, ancient and delicate, forms the heartbeat of ecosystems across time. So when we speak of gigantism, we are not only speaking of bodies, we are speaking of philosophies of existence, of ways of being that respond to the conditions of the universe. To grow large is to embody patience, to store energy for lean years, to carry the memory of climates past within the layers of fat and bone. It is to live as if the world were wide enough to hold you, and it was at least for a while. The planet in its deep wisdom has always whispered the same invitation. Grow if you can. The cold will test you. The land will reward you. The weight you carry will become your warmth. your strength, your story, and life, brave and curious as ever, has listened. Across eons, that whisper has produced creatures that redefined what alive could mean, beings whose size was not excess but equilibrium. Giants were never mistakes. They were expressions of a world that could afford abundance, that could sustain ambition. They were Earth's way of saying, I have enough room for wonder. Today we live in the quiet that follows their footsteps, but the laws that shape them still hum beneath us. Energy, balance, endurance, these principles remain the same. Somewhere, perhaps deep in the ocean or the unexplored wild, life is still experimenting, still listening to that ancient whisper, still testing the edge between weight and will. Gigantism, in the end, is not about dominance. It is about harmony. It is the art of lasting in a world that never stops changing, the slow dance between heat and hunger, between gravity and grace. Every great body that ever walked or swam or flew was part of that dance. And though their forms have vanished, their rhythm endures in the pulse of the planet, steady and vast, reminding us that life, when given time and space, will always reach upward, outward, onward, toward greatness. If you close your eyes and listen closely enough, you might still hear them. The slow thunder of footsteps across frozen earth, the soft rumble of deep voices calling through the snow. Once, long ago, the world echoed with such sounds, not from storms or earthquakes, but from herds of beings so vast, so gentle, and so quietly intelligent that the land itself seemed to part for them. These were the mammoths and the mastodons, two great branches of an ancient family, distant cousins in the grand story of life, each one a masterpiece of adaptation, memory, and quiet grace. They were not monsters. Despite their size and the mythic shadows they've left behind, they were thoughtful, social, and sensitive creatures. Imagine standing on the tundra 20,000 years ago. The wind cuts like glass, the sky is low and heavy with snow, and through the haze, you see them, a line of shapes moving slowly, steadily, heads bowed, tusks gleaming like crescents of bone against the white. They are led by an elder female, her gait deliberate, her eyes watchful. Around her move the younger ones, calves brushing against their mothers for warmth and reassurance. This is no aimless migration. It is a procession of memory, a living lineage retracing paths older than civilization itself. Both mammoths and mastodons belong to the same grand family that today includes elephants, and like their modern relatives, they lived by the wisdom of the matriarch. In each herd, the eldest female was the keeper of roots and seasons, the living archive of knowledge passed from generation to generation. She remembered the rivers that froze too soon, the valleys that held grass even in lean years, the timing of ice melt and the scent of danger. When she turned, the herd followed. When she paused, the world seemed to wait. Their social bonds were strong, almost tender. Calves played in the snow, their trumpets bright and clumsy, while older siblings practiced mock sparring with their growing tusks. The mothers communicated in low vibrations that could travel through the ground farther than sound could carry through air. A private language of touch and tremor. It wasn't just noise, it was emotion made physical. When a member of the herd fell ill or died, the others lingered, touching the body with their trunks, as if trying to understand the absence. Even in death, their intelligence was evident. They mourned, remembered, and learned. Physically, they were built for endurance, sculpted by ice and wind. The mammoth's coat was a marvel of natural engineering, a double layer of dense, shaggy hair over a thick pad of insulating fat, all covering a body designed to conserve heat in sub-zero climates. Beneath that fur, their blood held a secret. Unlike most mammals, mammoths had a unique form of hemoglobin that allowed oxygen to flow freely even in freezing temperatures. Their very circulation was tuned to the rhythm of the cold. To live in ice, they became warmth itself. The mastodons, meanwhile, favored forests and valleys, their world more wooded than the open steppes of their woolly cousins. Their tusks were straighter, their bodies a bit stockier, their diet rich in leaves, bark and twigs, rather than the tough grasses of the tundra. They used their trunks to strip branches, to dig through snow for roots, to delicately pluck leaves from high branches. Each movement of that trunk, a marvel of evolution, packed with tens of thousands of muscles, was both strength and artistry. A mammoth could lift a fallen tree with ease, or brush snow from a calf's face with the gentleness of a parent smoothing a child's hair. They were, in a sense, architects of their ecosystems. Every mouthful they took reshaped the landscape. When they grazed, they cleared pathways that let new plants grow. When they trampled, they pressed seeds into soil, scattering future forests in their wake. Their migrations carved ecological corridors that connected habitats across entire continents. Each footprint was a small act of creation. Without intending to, they kept the land alive and moving. In winter, they would use their tusks to sweep aside the snow, uncovering the buried grasses beneath. In doing so, they created feeding grounds not only for themselves, but for countless smaller animals that followed in their path. Their dung, massive in both quantity and consequence, carried seeds over vast distances, spreading life even as they fed. It's no exaggeration to say that they were gardeners of the Ice Age, nurturing the land one step, one meal, one journey at a time. And they were travelers, true nomads of the cold. The routes they walked stretched for hundreds of miles, from tundra to valley to tundra again, in a cycle as steady as the seasons. Each herd followed invisible lines of memory that led to ancestral feeding grounds, birthing grounds, and salt licks that had sustained generations before them. They crossed frozen rivers, skirted mountain passes, and moved with the patience of glaciers. Where they went, they carried the map of the world inside them. Scientists today can still trace their paths through the isotopic signatures in their tusks. Each growth ring in that curling ivory is a diary of their travels, records of temperature, diet, even stress. A single tusk tell a life story, where the mammoth was born, when the winters were harsh, when food was scarce, when it wandered far from home. They wrote their histories, not in words or symbols, but in layers of bone and calcium, spiraling ever outward. Despite their enormity, they were creatures of precision. Their trunks could pluck a single blade of grass or draw water from a frozen pond with practiced ease. They had the intelligence to plan, to cooperate, to teach. It's likely they understood dozens of vocal calls and subsonic rumbles, a vocabulary of tone and rhythm that carried both command and comfort. When one trumpeted alarm, the others gathered protectively around their young. When the matriarch called them onward, they obeyed without hesitation. Their society was built not on dominance, but on memory and trust. They laughed, too, or something close to it. Observing modern elephants, we see flashes of play, mischief, and joy. Mammoths and mastodons, with their similar brains and temperaments, almost certainly shared that spark. Perhaps they rolled in snowbanks to cool their skin, tossed clumps of frozen grass like toys, or splashed in meltwater streams with the abandon of creatures too large to fear anything but time. It's easy to think of intelligence as belonging only to creatures with hands, tools, or fire, but theirs was a different kind of wisdom, an embodied intelligence, quiet and ancient. They didn't build cities, but they remembered landscapes. They didn't write, but they shaped the earth. Their genius lay in endurance, in their ability to live within the limits of their world without ever exhausting it. They were large, yes, but never greedy. They took what they needed, and in return gave back abundance. Their size was not arrogance, it was balance. To keep their great bodies warm, they carried energy within them, but they also spread that energy outward. A mammoth herd moving across the tundra was like a heartbeat moving through the veins of the planet. Every step circulated nutrients, stirred soil, and opened space for new growth. They were both consumers and creators, shaping life by simply existing. And what a sight they must have been in motion. A column of fur and tusks stretching across a snowy plain, their shadows long in the pale sun, breath rising in plumes that drifted into cloud. The calves trotted in the shelter of the adult's legs, occasionally stumbling, occasionally lifted by a gentle trunk. At night, the herd gathered close, forming a circle against the cold, their bodies radiating warmth into the dark. The ground beneath them thawed slightly where they slept, a tiny defiance against the Ice Age. The mastodons, too, had their quiet beauty. In the shadowed forests of ancient America, they moved like living hills among the trees, their breath steaming in the morning chill. Their tusks, straighter and shorter than the mammoths, gleamed amber in the filtered sunlight. The sound of their chewing, the slow grind of bark and branch, was the forest's heartbeat. They shaped the woods as mammoths shaped the plains, clearing underbrush, opening glades, and cycling nutrients through soil and root. Without them, the rhythm of growth and decay would have faltered. In their intelligence, in their social warmth, there was something profoundly familiar, something that still stirs empathy across millennia. We recognize them not just as relics, but as reflections of ourselves, creatures who loved, remembered, and walked the world together. Their disappearance left more than a silence in the fossil record. It left a kind of ecological and emotional vacancy, a gap in the conversation between life and land. But for a long, shimmering age, they ruled in peace. They were not tyrants of the tundra or masters of the forest, but caretakers, quiet monarchs, whose reign was defined not by conquest, but by coexistence. When they moved, the earth followed their rhythm. When they paused, the wind seemed to rest. If you could have stood among them, perhaps you'd have felt it. That slow, grounding calm that only great creatures carry. The vibration of their footsteps would rise through your bones, a reminder that you too are part of something vast and living. And when the matriarch lifted her trunk toward the horizon, perhaps you'd have understood her language, the ancient call of movement, memory, and belonging. The mammoths and mastodons may be gone, but the wisdom they embodied remains etched into the world they shaped. The grasslands and forests still echo their patterns, the soil still holds the imprint of their feet, and our own species still carries, somewhere deep in its story, the awe of watching them pass. They were not just big animals, they were living symbols of endurance, community, and grace, gentle giants who walked softly, thought deeply, and without knowing it, helped the earth become what it is. Somewhere in that stillness of memory, the earth seems to whisper even now, they were here, they were kind, they remembered the way. And if you listen carefully enough, beneath the hum of the wind or the crunch of winter snow, you might almost hear their reply, slow, distant, and full of warmth, saying, in the deep language of the ground itself, "We are still walking." They waited in silence, their breath hidden by the tall grass, their eyes low and golden as the sun slid toward the horizon. To live as a saber-toothed cat was to live in patience, every muscle a question, every heartbeat a countdown. Across the frozen plains and shadowed woodlands, they ruled not by pursuit, but by presence. They did not chase. The saber-toothed cat, often called Smolodon, a name that sounds almost too gentle for such a creature, was the Ice Age's most elegant killer. It was not the largest predator to walk the earth, but few inspired such awe. Its body was a paradox of power and precision, built not for speed but for a single devastating moment. It did not need to run fast, it only needed to strike once. If you could see one now, you might think it familiar, a broad-shouldered cat with a thick neck and short tail, its fur a dapple of gold and shadow. But then you would see the teeth, two curved sabers of ivory, longer than your hand, gleaming even in the dimmest light. They were not meant for chewing or tearing like an ordinary carnivore's fangs. They were instruments of death, designed for accuracy. The saber-tooth was a surgeon of flesh. Those fangs were fragile in one sense, delicate as blades of glass if misused. They could not handle the twisting forces of a struggle. And so evolution taught the saber-tooth a different method, a choreography of ambush and stillness, a way of killing so swift and specialized that it left no time for resistance. It would stalk low and silent, muscles rippling under its thick coat, until it was close enough to feel the pulse of the air around its prey. Then, with a single bound, it struck, not to grapple but to finish. Its jaws opened wide, far wider than those of any modern cat, and the sabers drove deep into the soft tissues of the neck, severing arteries in an instant. One breath, one silence. In those brief seconds, evolution's artistry was on full display. The saber-tooth's neck and shoulder muscles were immense, anchoring the force needed to drive those fangs home. Its forelimbs were thick and powerful, capable of pinning animals several times its size to the ground. Its chest was broad, its spine flexible but heavy, like a coiled spring of bone and sinew. This was not an animal made for the chase. It was an animal made for inevitability. Its prey were giants, Massive herbivores that roamed the plains, beasts of muscle and horn and bone. The saber-toothed cat was perfectly attuned to them. It didn't waste energy pursuing smaller, faster animals. Instead, it hunted where strength mattered more than speed. It waited near waterholes, at the edges of migration paths, in the shadow of boulders, where the wind carried no scent. It watched, it waited, and when the herd passed close enough, it chose the weak, the young, the isolated, and the quiet turned into a heartbeat of violence. Scientists have debated whether the saber-tooth hunted alone or in groups, and evidence from fossil sites suggests both possibilities. Many skeletons show healed injuries, broken bones that had mended with time, implying that others may have shared kills or cared for wounded members. If that's true, then the saber-tooth was not just a solitary assassin, but part of a coordinated unit, a brotherhood and sisterhood of predators working with silent understanding. Picture it, a dusk sky, the wind still, and three shadows moving in unison through the grass, each step measured, each eye fixed on the same target. The air itself would seem to hold its breath. They were intelligent hunters. They used terrain as tool and timing as weapon. Their claws dug quietly into the soil as they crept closer, their tails low, their muscles humming like drawn bows. When they struck, it was almost theatrical, a flash of motion, a blur of fur and snow, and then stillness again. To watch a saber-tooth hunt must have been like watching lightning think. But they were not mindless killers. There was an elegance to their design, an economy of effort. They killed only what they needed, and their kills fed more than just themselves. The remains of their meals would have drawn scavengers and smaller predators, feeding an entire web of life. Even death, in their world, was part of the balance. Their saber teeth, those iconic, terrible blades, were both their gift and their curse. They defined the species, but they also defined its limits. They were so specialized, so perfectly tuned to a certain way of life, that when the world changed, the saber-tooth's mastery became a vulnerability. But that story comes later. For now, in this frozen chapter of Earth's history, the saber-tooth was perfection given form. Its senses were extraordinary. Its eyes, large and forward-facing, captured movement in near darkness. Its nose could detect the faintest trace of blood on the wind. Its ears twitched to the low rumble of hooves, miles away. It could feel vibrations through the ground, an early warning system born from stillness. To live as a saber-tooth was to be attuned to silence, to know that every motion, every sound, every change in the air might mean survival or starvation. Its voice was deep and resonant, a sound more like thunder than a roar. In the long winter nights, it would echo across the plains, a low call that told others of its kind where it roamed. There's something haunting in imagining that sound rolling over the snow, through the skeletal trees, a voice of power and solitude. Perhaps the mammoths heard it too and shifted their herds closer together, instinct recognizing the signature of death in the air. When not hunting, the saber-tooth lived much like modern big cats, resting for long hours, basking in sunlight, grooming its thick coat with deliberate calm. Its fur, dense and warm, was built for climates colder than most modern cats could endure. It would curl into itself during blizzards, its great body rising and falling with the rhythm of sleep, while snow gathered on its back like a blanket. For all its ferocity, there was peace in its stillness. The saber-toothed existence shaped more than its prey. It shaped the behavior of the entire ecosystem. Prey species learned caution from it. Herds became tighter, migration patterns more unpredictable. Even the rhythm of grazing and resting changed, adapted to avoid the places and hours where the saber-tooth ruled. In that way, it was not only a predator but an artist of balance, sculpting the behaviors of other species through fear. Where it hunted, vigilance became the law of survival. Fear, after all, is one of evolution's sharpest tools. The mere possibility of the saber-tooth was enough to change the world around it. Even the wind seemed to move differently where it lingered. A herd might smell its presence days after it had left and still avoid the area, as if the shadow of the predator clung to the earth. That is how influence works in nature, not always through violence, but through memory. There was beauty in the way it moved, even in violence. To ambush was to dance with physics. Every leap was a calculation, every strike a gamble. It needed perfect timing, perfect balance, perfect strength. One mistake, a misjudged jump, a bone twisted in the snow, and the price was high. A broken fang or injured limb could mean starvation. Yet they continued, generation after generation, refining that moment of attack until it became art. You could say the saber-tooth was a creature of tension, grace, and danger locked in a single frame. It lived on the edge of necessity, forever balancing the need to kill with the risk of killing. In that fragile equilibrium lay its genius. Nature often rewards versatility, but sometimes, for a brief and shining era, it rewards perfection instead. The saber-tooth was one such perfection, a specialist so complete that it seemed less like an animal, and more like an idea the earth itself had dreamed into being. And what an idea it was! Power sheathed in silence, patience honed to steel, beauty shaped for an instant of violence, and then gone. Imagine standing on a ridge, the night cold enough to crack stone. The stars are sharp, the wind restless. Below you, a movement, barely a ripple in the grass. Then another, then a flash, gold eyes, ivory blades, a whisper of snow, and the world's oldest story playing out again, the hunter and the hunted, life and death in perfect proportion. The saber-tooth leaps, lands, and the silence returns, complete as before. The cycle continues. Their legacy remains not only in bone but in the memory of fear and fascination they inspired. Every predator since then carries a faint echo of their design. The precision of the strike, the patience of the stalk, the knowledge that timing matters more than force. The saber-tooth taught the world what it means to be efficient, to be exact, to be quiet until the moment when quiet ends. They were, in their way, philosophers of survival. They understood that power does not always need to announce itself. Sometimes it waits, sometimes it listens, and when the moment comes, it acts, not wildly, but with purpose so focused it seems almost serene. So when we think of them now, let's not only imagine the fangs and the fury, let's imagine the calm before the still air, the patient heartbeat, the knowing gaze fixed on the horizon. The saber-toothed cat was not merely a killer, it was a lesson in restraint, a testament to what precision can achieve when guided by instinct and time. Somewhere in the bones buried beneath ancient tar and frozen soil, that lesson remains. That beauty and danger can coexist, that silence can be mightier than motion, and that even the deadliest of creatures can move with grace enough to make the earth itself hold its breath. In the quiet of an imagined Ice Age dusk, you can almost hear it. A low growl, the whisper of snow shifting under padded feet, and then nothing. Only the memory of something perfect passing through the world. The saber-tooth was here, it struck, it vanished, and the land, a little wiser, exhaled. In the chill air of an ancient plain, the world once trembled not from storms, nor from the rumble of mammoths, but from the rhythm of padded feet moving in perfect time. The sound began faint, a whisper through the frost, and then grew, a chorus of soft thuds and breathless growls, weaving through the silence like a drumbeat of purpose. That was the sound of the dire wolf, the Ice Age's relentless hunter, not a lone shadow, but many. A pack, a family, a moving intelligence bound by hunger and kinship. The dire wolf, Canis dirus, was more than a larger version of the modern grey wolf. It was something heavier, denser, older. It carried the weight of survival in every muscle. Its jaws could crush bone, its bite measured in forces so great it could shatter the limbs of its prey. Its body was built for stamina, not elegance. Shorter legs, broader chest, more power in the shoulders. It was less a sprinter and more a living storm front, rolling across the grasslands with precision and patience. Picture them in motion. The sun hangs low, the tundra wind slicing sideways, carrying the scent of potential. Dozens of shapes move across the pale plain, coordinated but fluid, like a single organism with many limbs. The dire wolves hunt not as individuals but as an idea, the collective mind of pursuit. One runs to flush, another to corner, another to strike. Each wolf knows its place without command, the way a heartbeat knows to follow the pulse before it. Their communication was not only in sound, but in motion and gaze. A flick of an ear could shift the direction of the chase, a low growl could signal an opening. When they ran together, their breathing aligned, a rhythm of inhalation and exhalation that filled the air like wind through reeds. They were the Ice Age's tacticians, and their strategy was not speed alone, but persistence. They could run for miles, never stopping, never rushing too soon. They waited for exhaustion to be their ally. A dire wolf's bite was its masterpiece. Its jaw muscles were enormous, anchored by thick ridges along the skull, giving it a power unmatched among its kin. The bite force exceeded that of the grey wolf by nearly half again, enough to crush through the heavy bones of ancient herbivores. This strength wasn't just for killing, it was for feeding. They could reach the marrow locked deep within, extracting energy from what other predators left behind. In the harsh world of the Ice Age, that efficiency meant survival. They were opportunists, yes, but not scavengers. They were architects of the hunt. Their targets were large and formidable, great bison, ancient horses, and sometimes even the unwary giants of their age. The chase would begin at dawn or dusk. When the air was cool and the light uncertain, the wolves would test their prey first, running parallel, watching for signs of weakness. A limp, a stumble, hesitation. When one faltered, the pack tightened like a noose. The lead wolves would dart ahead, snapping at flanks and heels, steering the prey into uneven ground or toward a waiting ambush. The moment of the strike was a harmony of violence, one wolf clinging to the hind leg, another to the throat, another to the shoulder. Their coordination was astonishing, a choreography written by instinct and perfected by need. But within the ferocity there was also structure, a social order shaped by cooperation and hierarchy. Packs were families, led often by an experienced pair whose leadership depended not on brute force but on trust. The bond between packmates was as vital as muscle or tooth. They hunted together, ate together, raised pups together, and mourned their dead. Fossil evidence suggests that injured dire wolves sometimes lived long after their wounds should have been fatal, perhaps cared for by their pack. Compassion, it seems, was another weapon in their evolutionary arsenal. They were loud too, vocal in ways both beautiful and unsettling. Their howls rolled across the tundra like mist, low and resonant, each note carrying information about distance, strength, and belonging. To hear them was to know the land was claimed, and their howls were not merely warnings. They were songs of orientation, of connection, of reassurance in a world vast and cold. A single howl could carry for miles, answered by others in the distance, until the whole plain hummed with their presence. Their ecosystem revolved around their influence. Where dire wolves hunted, balance followed. They kept herds moving, preventing overgrazing. They culled the weak, maintaining the health of populations. Their very existence shaped the rhythm of life around them. The timing of migrations, the vigilance of prey, the paths of scavengers who followed their kills. The dire wolf was not merely part of the food chain, it was one of its architects, an apex predator whose hunger kept the Earth's systems tuned. Their strength, however, was more than physical. It was social intelligence. To coordinate such complex hunts required awareness, empathy, and memory. Each pack was an education system in motion, where pups learned by watching, by imitating, by play that mimicked pursuit. In those games, they rehearsed survival, perfecting teamwork long before their first real hunt. And when the young ones succeeded, the whole pack celebrated, nuzzling, whining, sharing food. Their success was communal, their survival a shared act of will. If you could watch them up close, you'd see that their faces told stories. The eyes of a dire wolf weren't just predatory, they were thoughtful, reflective, holding that strange mix of wildness and understanding that still lingers in their distant descendants. They were creatures that lived fully in the moment, but also seemed to remember the weight of the world. Despite their ferocity, they were not creatures of chaos. They were disciplined, almost methodical. When they hunted, they used energy efficiently, never sprinting unless it mattered, never wasting emotion. Their gait was steady, their steps silent, their tails held low until the moment of the chase. They understood patience, the art of letting the world come to them. And when they rested, they did so in warmth and companionship. The pack curled together, bodies overlapping, sharing heat under the open sky. Their fur was dense, adapted to the cold, with a coarse outer layer and soft undercoat that trapped air close to the skin. Even their blood carried adaptations for chill endurance, flowing steadily even in deep frost. They were living furnaces fueled by meat and motion. It is easy, in imagination, to focus on their teeth and jaws, their reputation for danger. But the real power of the dire wolf was in its togetherness. One wolf could not take down a massive herbivore. 10 could alone. They were predators. Together, they were inevitability. That is perhaps the most striking truth about them. They embodied cooperation as evolution's sharpest tool. The pack was a living organism larger than any individual, each wolf a cell in a greater body of intent. Their dominance shaped entire landscapes. Prey animals altered migration patterns to avoid their hunting territories. Other predators learned to scavenge at the edges of their kills rather than challenge them directly. Even the scavenger birds flew differently where dire wolves ruled, waiting farther back, circling longer, wary of the collective gaze that could turn from prey to intruder in an instant. They lived for millennia, adapting to changing climates, following the shifting edge of ice and grass. They endured cold, drought, and the ebb and flow of prey populations. For a time, they were everywhere, their paw prints pressed into the mud of what would one day be deserts, forests and cities. In some places, those paw prints still lie fossilized, perfect impressions of pads and claws, frozen moments of pursuit. Each track tells a story, direction, speed, intention. And what intention it was! To watch a dire wolf hunt was to witness purpose in motion, fluid, fierce, almost mathematical. They didn't chase for glory, they chased for necessity, for the continuation of their pack's heartbeat. Their intelligence was the intelligence of survival, honed by generations of trial and success. They were, in every sense, engineers of predation. Yet for all their deadliness, there was humor in their world too, a rough, earthy humor of play and mischief. Pups would tug at the tails of elders, tumble over one another in mock hunts, or sneak scraps from kills when they thought no one was looking. Adults tolerated it with growls that were more amused than angry. Even in the heart of the Ice Age, joy had a place among them. Their reign as apex predators gave structure to the wild. Every howl that rolled across the plains was a declaration, not just of dominance, but of stability, a sign that the system still worked. The dire wolf's hunger kept the world balanced. Its discipline kept the wilderness honest. And though they lived by tooth and chase, they were no mindless killers. They were caretakers in their way, ensuring that life did not stagnate. The grass grew stronger where the herds moved. The herds moved because the wolves ran. In that endless cycle of pursuit and renewal, the land itself found rhythm. Imagine then the final image of them, a pack silhouetted against the winter dusk, their breath clouding in the freezing air. One lifts its head and howls, and the others join, a harmony of strength, loyalty, and hunger. The sound carries for miles, rolling across valleys, fading into the distance like a heartbeat disappearing into snow. They were fierce, yes, but also noble in a way that only creatures of necessity can be. They did not hunt for pleasure. They hunted because life demanded motion, and they answered. Their bite was their law, their pack their creed, their endurance their legacy. And if the earth could speak of them now, perhaps it would say something like this. They ran well, they kept the balance, they lived as the wind lives together, relentless, beautiful in their purpose. The dire wolves are gone, but their spirit lingers in every rustle of grass that hides a predator, in every coordinated hunt, in every glint of amber eyes beneath the moon. They were the pulse of their age, the breath of the wild turned into motion. And though the tundra is quiet now, somewhere deep in the memory of the planet, the pack still runs tireless, loyal, eternal, chasing the echo of their own song. In the cold theatre of the Ice Age, where snow fell like memory and wind carved the plains into silver, there rose a monarch, unlike any other, not the swiftest, not the cleverest, but perhaps the most commanding, the short-faced bear Arctodus Simus. Imagine a creature so vast that when it stood upright, its head brushed the low clouds of the glacial dawn, towering 3.5 meters tall, shoulders broad as doorways, muscles rippling beneath a golden brown pelt. This was not merely an animal, it was a living continent of hunger, power, and quiet authority. To see one in motion must have been like watching a storm take shape. The ground would seem to vibrate before it appeared, its breath visible even from a distance, curling through the frozen air like steam from the earth's core. It walked with long, loping strides, covering ground faster than logic should allow, its head swinging low, its nostrils wide and alert. The short-faced bear did not creep. It arrived. Its presence turned the tundra into a stage, its shadow into law. Among the beasts of the Ice Age, it was unmatched in size and reach. Standing upright, it could look over most other creatures. Even on all fours, its back rose higher than the chest of a tall man. Its limbs were long, built for speed across open land. Though it looked heavy, it could run fast, frighteningly fast. Its body was not meant for climbing trees or burrowing into safety. It was meant to own the horizon. The name short-faced was misleading. Its face was not small, only compact, broad, muscular, with a wide muzzle built for crushing and tearing. Its jaws could pulverize bone, and its teeth bore the scars of a diet that was anything but delicate. It was an omnivore by design, but an opportunist by calling. It would eat berries in summer, roots in autumn, carrion in winter, and flesh whenever flesh could be found. Its kingdom was the moment, whatever chance offered it claimed. Some have called it a thief, but that word feels too small. The short-faced bear was not a scavenger in the timid sense. It was a conqueror of meals, a living embodiment of opportunism elevated to art. It could smell a carcass from miles away, and would arrive to find the air still trembling with the echoes of struggle. If other predators had brought down prey, the bear would step from the mist, its head high, its stride unhurried. There was no need for a fight. Its sheer mass was persuasion enough. Picture the scene: a bitter dawn, a kill fresh in the snow, steam rising from warm blood. The air is thick with scent, and then, from the pale horizon, the monarch comes, massive, silent, inevitable. The other predators freeze. The air stills, the bear lowers its head and exhales once. A slow gust that sends frost swirling. It walks forward unchallenged and begins to eat. The world bends to its appetite. But though it could steal, it could also hunt. There was cunning beneath that strength, calculation behind those golden eyes. The short-faced bear's long legs and efficient gait allowed it to pursue prey across great distances. It was not built for quick bursts like the great cats. It was built for endurance. It could outlast, outwalk, and outthink almost anything on four legs. Its strategy was patience. Follow, watch, wait for weakness. Hunger was not desperation for it. It was direction. Its nose, vast and finely tuned, could read the landscape like a book. Every gust of air carried information: the presence of prey, the promise of carrion, the distance to the next meal. Scientists have called it one of the most powerful olfactory systems ever evolved. It could smell a carcass 30 kilometers away, could trace the faintest scent through snow and storm. To the short-faced bear, the invisible world of scent was as vivid as sunlight. It did not see the land, it sensed it. Its diet was a portrait of versatility. In lean seasons, it dug for roots or scavenged fish from frozen rivers. In times of plenty, it gorged on meat, cracking femurs to reach the rich marrow inside. The chemical signature of its bones reveals this duality: an omnivore with a carnivore's heart, a wanderer whose meals spanned the spectrum of the living and the dead. It was the Ice Age's ultimate realist, neither picky nor proud, simply effective. And yet, for all its power, there was an odd elegance to it. Its fur caught the sun in copper tones, shimmering against the snow. Its stride had a rolling rhythm, efficient and tireless. When it reared onto its hind legs to sniff the air, it looked almost like a monument, an ancient sculpture come to life, forged from hunger and endurance. This was a creature that did not just live in its world, it defined it. Its dominance was ecological, not tyrannical. where the short-faced bear roamed. Balance followed through fear and respect. Its presence dictated the behavior of other predators, the movement of prey, even the pattern of scavengers that followed in its wake. It was a regulator of the living, a force of redistribution. Every bite it took, every meal it claimed, sent ripples through the ecosystem, and it was clever in its opportunism. Some scientists imagine it trailing migrating herds, not to attack them outright, but to follow at a distance, waiting for the weak or dying to fall. Others believe it may have lingered near rivers or coastlines, sniffing out fish runs or beached carcasses. It could change its strategy with the seasons, its vast range allowing it to go wherever sustenance called. In the great chessboard of the Ice Age, the short-faced bear was the player who never rushed a move. Its dominance wasn't only about power, it was about presence. No creature ignored it. When it entered a valley, the wind seemed to hush. Its scent was enough to alter the behavior of every living thing for miles. Birds took to the air, small mammals froze in their burrows, even the landscape seemed to acknowledge it, snow swirling differently around its massive frame, as if nature itself curved slightly to accommodate its rule. But even kings must rest. When it found a quiet place, a cave, a thicket, the lee of a frozen hill, it would lie down, folding its enormous limbs beneath itself, and sleep with the serenity of one who fears nothing. The rise and fall of its breath would echo faintly through the air, steady and slow. And if it dreamed, perhaps it dreamed of movement, of the endless plains it ruled, of the scent of distant rivers, of the soft weight of snow settling on its fur. The short-faced bear was a paradox, solitary yet central to the life around it, brutal yet efficient, ancient yet startlingly modern in its adaptability. It ruled not through cruelty, but through competence. It didn't need to chase every opportunity. It simply needed to be there. In ecology, presence itself can be power. Its rule lasted for tens of thousands of years, across vast distances, from icy tundras to warmer plains. Its paw prints left testimony to its reach. Each step marked a different story, a meal found, a rival confronted, a territory reclaimed, its claws long and curved, carved through soil and stone alike. When it walked, the earth remembered, and though it may have competed with other predators, it was rarely threatened. Its size alone discouraged conflict. Its confidence was not arrogance. It was certainty. In a world of hunger, it was rarely hungry for long. And yet, despite its might, it lived within the same natural laws as all creatures. Feast and famine, rise and decline. For all its grandeur, it was bound to the same fragile threads of balance that weave through every age. Still, it's hard not to imagine the awe it inspired. Picture it standing tall against the skyline, sunlight striking its fur, steam rising from its nostrils as it surveys its domain. It is the embodiment of opportunity, the will of survival made flesh. The wind seems to whisper its name, Arctodus, the bear who waits, the bear who claims, the bear who endures. There is something almost regal about its story. It reminds us that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply arrives and takes what it needs. The short-faced bear was not cruel, it was efficient. Not reckless, it was deliberate. It ruled not by rage, but by presence. It was the calm center of a chaotic world, the still point around which the Ice Age turned. And though time eventually claimed it, as it claims all rulers, its shadow lingers in the imagination. Every mountain bear that sniffs the wind, every solitary predator that walks the edge of wilderness, carries a spark of its legacy. The spirit of opportunism, of patience and power, did not vanish with Arctodus Simus. It merely changed its form, adapted, continued, because the lesson of the short-faced bear was never about domination. It was about balance through decisiveness, mastery through awareness. If the earth could speak of that time, perhaps it would say, he stood tallest, but not tallest in pride. He ruled by knowing when to take and when to wait. He was hunger, but also harmony, the monarch who needed no throne. So let the myth of the short-faced bear endure. Let us remember the glint of its eyes in the pale dawn, the echo of its stride across the frozen steppe, the soft authority with which it claimed the world around it. The Ice Age had many predators, but only one king of chance, an emperor of patience, cloaked in fur and silence, whose reign was not measured in battles, but in the long, unbroken calm of knowing it did not need to fight to win. And if you listen on some wind-swept night, when the air feels older than it should, you might almost hear that voice again, the earth's whisper, low and certain, carrying across the snow, rule if you must, but rule wisely. In the grand, cold theatre of the late Ice Age, where the wind sang through glacial valleys and the horizon shimmered like frozen glass, not every giant thundered across the land. Some moved slowly, patiently, as if time itself had slowed to match their pace. They were the quiet ones, the gentle titans who did not hunt or chase, but simply lived, shaping the world through their weight and presence. Among them were two of the most remarkable beings ever to walk the earth, the giant ground sloth and the woolly rhinoceros. They were opposites in texture but twins in temperament, beasts of immense power who carried no malice, creatures that embodied the art of slow motion in a fast, frozen world. Together, they taught the landscape patience. Imagine, if you will, a creature rising 6 meters tall, when it reared on its hind legs, its shadow stretching long across a prehistoric plain. That was the giant ground sloth, known to science as Megatherium. Its very name means great beast, and rightly so. It weighed as much as an elephant, but moved with the calm deliberation of a drifting cloud. Covered in coarse fur, it lumbered through ancient forests and open woodlands, a creature halfway between mountain and memory. It wasn't a predator. It wasn't even much of a wanderer. It was a connoisseur of leaves, a specialist in patience. Standing upright, it would wrap its enormous claws, each as long as a man's forearm, around the trunk of a tree, pulling it down with an almost lazy strength. Then, with a slow sweep of its head, it would strip branches clean of leaves, chewing thoughtfully as if considering each bite. Its mouth was lined with peg-like teeth that ground vegetation into a pulp. No haste, no competition, just the quiet rhythm of chewing beneath the sun. Its arms were long and powerful, capable of pushing over trees, and its tail was thick as a pillar used as a tripod to balance its towering frame. When it stood like that, tail grounded, arms reaching, head high, it looked less like an animal and more like a living monument, a relic sculpted from time itself. Yet, despite its size, it was no menace. Its movements were deliberate, its nature tranquil. It had few enemies, not because it fought them off, but because attacking such a creature was simply not worth the trouble. Its hide was thick, its claws formidable, its strength quiet, but absolute. In a world of tooth and claw, the giant ground sloth was a creature that won by refusing to rush. Its slow grace shaped the forests it called home. By pulling down trees and breaking branches, it opened gaps in the canopy, letting sunlight spill onto the forest floor. New plants grew where it fed. The landscape renewed itself in its wake. Its dung, vast in both quantity and reach, carried seeds far and wide, fertilizing soil, planting future forests with every lumbering step. The giant sloth was a gardener, though it never intended to be. And perhaps there was humor in its slowness, a cosmic kind of irony. Here was a creature so immense that even when it moved, the earth seemed to sigh, and yet it lived almost entirely on leaves. The same gentle fuel that feeds the smallest of caterpillars sustained this towering bulk. Its strength came not from ferocity but from stillness, from a metabolism tuned to the long pulse of the earth itself. Across open plains further north, another gentle giant grazed, not upright like the sloth, but low to the ground, built for endurance and frost. The woolly rhinoceros, Colodonta antiquitatis, was a masterpiece of cold-weather design, a mountain of muscle cloaked in hair with a horn like a crescent moon sweeping forward from its snout. Its silhouette against the snow was unmistakable, broad, stooped, powerful, crowned with the curve of ivory and shadow. It stood about 2 meters tall at the shoulder, but its length and weight gave it the gravity of a small hill. Its coat was dense and woolly, colored in shades of rust and brown, to blend with the tundra. Beneath that shaggy armor lay layers of insulating fat, a living furnace designed to defy the coldest wind. Its blood carried adaptations for chill survival, circulating warmth even through the thick hide of its limbs. The woolly rhinoceros was a creature of routine and ritual. It grazed slowly across the frozen steppe, sweeping its great horn through snow to uncover grass beneath. The sound of that scraping, a low hiss followed by the tearing crunch of ice, was one of the defining sounds of the Ice Age plains. Its mouth, wide and flat, was perfect for cropping short grasses and sedges, and it spent much of its day simply eating, conserving heat through stillness. Its horn, though often imagined as a weapon, was just as likely a tool used to shovel snow, to clear paths, to attract mates, or perhaps to assert gentle dominance among others of its kind. It was both banner and shovel, symbol and survival, and though it could defend itself if threatened, it was not aggressive by nature. It preferred distance over combat, patience over pride. The woolly rhinoceros shaped the land through persistence. As it grazed, it maintained the tundra, keeping the grasslands open, preventing the encroachment of forest. Its movement and feeding patterns sculpted entire ecosystems, sustaining the delicate balance between ice and earth. Like the sloth, it carried the unintentional wisdom of slow creatures, the understanding that influence does not always come from action, but from presence. If the giant ground sloth was the slow architect of the forest, the woolly rhino was the caretaker of the plains. Together they formed a duet of movement and stillness, one reshaping trees, the other sculpting grass. Theirs was a quiet reign, one of patience, resilience, and deep, wordless strength. And though they seemed sluggish to our restless eyes, their slowness was not weakness. It was mastery. To move slowly in a harsh world is to understand something profound, that survival is not always about speed or sharpness, but about knowing when to save energy, when to endure, when to let the world move around you. The sloth and the rhinoceros carried this wisdom in their very bones. Imagine the two of them far apart, but under the same ancient sky. The sloth standing in a patch of sunlight chewing lazily, flakes of bark falling from its claws. The rhino, miles away, sweeping snow aside, the air steaming from its nostrils. Neither rushed, neither feared, they simply existed, fast, steady, necessary. If the saber-tooth was the spark of danger and the dire wolf the embodiment of teamwork, then the giant sloth and the woolly rhino were the counterpoint, the deep, grounding notes that kept the song of life balanced. They reminded the world that gentleness could coexist with grandeur, that slowness could shape eternity. Even their defenses spoke of patience. The sloth's claws were slow but decisive, its reach long enough to strike if provoked. The rhino's horn, when lowered, could send even the boldest intruder flying, a reminder that still waters and still creatures can run deep with power. But most of the time they had no need for violence. Their size was their language. The message was simple. I am here, I am enough, move around me. Their worlds were rich in sensory texture. The giant sloth's forest smelled of damp leaves and sap, its trails lined with broken branches and soft footprints pressed deep into loam. The woolly rhino's tundra smelled of snow and dry grass, its paths carved through frost and mud. To follow their trails today is to walk through echoes, the shapes of lives too large for their time, yet perfectly suited to it. In a way, they were artists of balance. They asked nothing more of the world than it could give, and in return they gave it form. The giant sloth's slow meals pruned and renewed the forest. The woolly rhino's endless grazing tended the steppe like a gardener mowing an eternal meadow. They kept the rhythm steady, the seasons turning, the light and shadow in harmony. And there was a strange humour to their grandeur. To see such bulk move so carefully, to watch the sloth scratch its back against a tree with the gentleness of a sleepy cat, or the rhino sneeze after digging through a snowdrift. It must have made even the earth chuckle softly. Not all greatness roars, some greatness sighs, snorts and shuffles. Yet, for all their calm, their disappearance left the world quieter, in ways that still linger. Without the sloth, the forests grew denser. Without the rhino, the grasslands shifted. Their absence rearranged the earth's tapestry, threads of slowness pulled from the weave of life. But their memory remains, not just in fossils, but in the soil they turned, the seeds they spread, the spaces they created for life to thrive. They were not symbols of strength, but of balance. They lived with the earth, not against it. Their pace matched the rhythm of rivers. Their patience mirrored the turning of seasons. To watch them would have been to watch time itself, learning to breathe. If the planet had a voice in those days, and perhaps it did, it might have whispered to them, as it whispered to all giants, move slowly, eat well, carry the forest and the field within you. Do not rush. You have all the time in the world, and they did. For millennia, the giant ground sloth and the woolly rhinoceros moved through their worlds with unhurried certainty, shaping the land one leaf, one blade of grass at a time. They did not conquer, they sustained. They did not fight, they balanced. They were, in every sense, the calm between storms, the steady heartbeat of an age ruled by extremes. Even now, if you close your eyes and listen to the wind moving through trees or across plains, you might hear a faint echo of their passing, the slow tread of enormous feet, the steady crunch of snow under weight, the sound of patience made flesh. The earth remembers them, and perhaps in its quiet way, still dreams of their gentle company. In the endless grasslands of the ancient world, under a sun that shimmered through thin ice age air, there moved a creature that looked less like an animal and more like a dream built of stone. Slow, steady, and indomitable, it trundled through the plains like a walking fortress, a shell of bone and patience, a creature that the earth itself seemed to have sculpted from its own armor. This was Glyptodon, the living tank of the Pleistocene. It was not graceful, not fast, and not fierce in the way of predators, but it was magnificent, a 2-ton masterpiece of defense and endurance, covered from head to tail in a mosaic of thick, fused plate. Each segment of its armor was a hexagon of bone, polished smooth by centuries of dust and sunlight. The shell gleamed faintly in the daylight, like the carapace of a mythical beast forged from bronze. To touch it would have been like touching the earth's crust itself, solid, unyielding, ancient. Gleptodon was an armadillo, technically a relative of the small skittering creatures that still roll through the deserts today, but it was armadillo made colossal. Imagine an animal the size of a small car, nearly 4 meters long, its back domed and rounded like an enormous shield, its head jutted forward beneath the shell, small eyes peering out with the calm, unbothered expression of something that knew no fear. For what could threaten such a creature? It moved with a slow, deliberate gait, each footstep leaving a deep rounded print in the soft ground. The sound of its approach was the rhythmic crunch of weight on soil, like a drum beat muffled by time. It grazed endlessly, its square muzzle sweeping the ground for grasses and low herbs. Its teeth were simple, made not for chewing meat or grinding bones, but for slicing through the tough stalks of the savanna. It did not chase, it simply consumed, transforming sunlight into motion one mouthful at a time. Despite its massive bulk, Glyptodon was a surprisingly quiet creature. It preferred solitude or loose gatherings of others like itself, wandering across the plains with the slow purpose of migrating clouds. They didn't need herds for protection. Their armor was enough. Beneath that shell, a layer of bone up to 5 centimeters thick, the creature's body was virtually invincible. Even its tail was a weapon, a thick, muscular club encased in bony rings, sometimes tipped with spikes. When swung, it could shatter the bones of anything foolish enough to approach. It was less a tail and more a medieval mace brought to life. The earth beneath its feet bore witness to its quiet power. As it grazed and wandered, Glyptodon shaped the land itself. Its great feet churned the soil, pressing seeds deep, breaking hard ground, and spreading vegetation far and wide. The grasses it grazed grew back denser, healthier, stronger, creating open pastures where before there had been thickets. Each movement was ecological architecture, the slow sculpting of entire ecosystems through weight and repetition. The plains thrived under its care, though it never knew it. It was in many ways the gardener of the Pleistocene. Its diet kept the balance of plant life. Its droppings fertilized the soil, and its heavy shell plowed through underbrush that might otherwise choke the savanna. In every sense, it carried life forward, not through speed or cunning, but through the patient art of existing in harmony with its world. To watch a Glyptodon eat was to witness serenity made flesh. It would lower its head, its nostrils close to the earth, and nibble methodically, pausing only to shift its weight or flick its tail against flies. The armor plates along its back rose and fell gently with its breath, like the slow inhalation of a mountain. If startled, it didn't run. It couldn't. Instead, it simply pulled in its head, tucked its legs, and let the world exhaust itself against its shell. A bite or claw might scratch the surface, but never break it. The message was simple: try if you must, but you will fail. This was not arrogance, it was confidence born of adaptation. The Glyptodon had survived countless shifts of climate and predator alike, each generation refining the art of stillness. It was a creature that trusted time itself, knowing that the rush of hunters and the tremors of fear all passed eventually, leaving only the steady pulse of the earth behind. Beneath the sunlight, its armor wasn't dull grey as you might imagine. It carried shades of ochre, brown, even faint amber hues. Dust and pollen settled into the grooves of its plates, giving it the look of an ancient relic, as though it had been carved from the very stones it walked upon. When rain came, droplets rolled down its shell like water on a dome, glinting briefly before vanishing. To a casual observer, it might have looked almost comical, a giant, armored boulder with stubby legs and a small head. But to the land itself it was essential, a quiet engine of change. Glyptodon's slow steps echoed a philosophy older than reason, that strength lies not always in speed or cunning, but in presence, in being unmovable, unbothered, unhurried, while other creatures ran and fought and perished. Glyptodon endured. Its defense was not aggression but patience, not attack but resilience. When it slept, it dug shallow hollows in the earth, curling into itself, shell gleaming faintly under moonlight. The warmth trapped beneath that dome kept it safe from the cold, its breath rising in slow clouds. Sometimes ancient winds would sweep dust over its resting form until it looked like a mound of earth. Perhaps travelers of that time, human or beast, walked past, never realizing that what they saw was not landscape but life. Its senses were sharp but understated. Its sense of smell guided it to fresh vegetation and water. Its hearing caught the tremor of distant footsteps. Its eyesight, while modest, was tuned to the golden light of the low sun, enough to navigate the plains, enough to see the slow dance of the horizon. It didn't need to see much more. For Glyptodon, the world existed in the immediate, the ground beneath its feet, the wind on its shell, the taste of grass between its teeth. Its presence influenced everything around it. Where it traveled, paths formed wide, shallow tracks pressed into the soil, later followed by water, roots, and new life. Over centuries, these trails became patterns in the landscape, evidence of movement so steady that the earth itself seemed to have learned the habit of their walking. In that way, Glyptodon was both creature and cartographer, tracing invisible maps across a living world. Though it looked cumbersome, it could move surprisingly efficiently when it chose. Its legs were short but sturdy, and it had an odd, swaying gait that kept its massive shell balanced as it walked. It wasn't quick, but it was relentless. Mile after mile, season after season, it wandered across its territory, following the rhythm of growth and rain. It needed no den, no burrow, no fortress. Its fortress travelled with it, and yet for all its might, there was gentleness in its nature. It harmed no one unless threatened. Its eyes, small and dark beneath the ridge of bone, carried a calm intelligence, the kind of gaze that measures the world not in fear or aggression, but in quiet understanding. There was a strange dignity in its slowness, a humility in its resilience. It did not conquer the land, it belonged to it. Scientists believe its thick armor evolved not just for defense, but also as a kind of environmental regulator. The bony plates, or osteoderms, helped manage heat, absorbing sunlight by day and releasing it at night. Its shell was not only shield, but temperature keeper, a perfect balance between warmth and protection. Nature, ever the engineer, had designed the Glyptodon to carry its own climate wherever it went. Its tail, heavy and ringed in bone, was both protection and punctuation. When threatened, it could swing that tail with the force of a hammer, a final warning to any foolhardy attacker. The sound of it striking the earth was deep, resonant. a sound that might have startled birds into flight for miles around. But most days that tail simply swayed behind it, tapping the ground now and then like a drumbeat of patience. The humour of its existence lay in its contradiction, a creature so armed, yet so peaceful. If you were to stumble upon one grazing quietly under the late Pleistocene sun, you might laugh softly to yourself. It looked like nature's idea of a joke, a boulder that decided to grow legs. But as you watched, that laughter would fade into awe. You'd see how the ground trembled slightly beneath its weight, how grass bent and then sprang back in its wake, how even the air seemed to move differently around its massive form. Glyptodon did not dominate by fear. It shaped the land through constancy. Its every movement, slow, deliberate, unassuming, was an act of balance. It ate what it needed. It rested when it moved forward, always forward, not because it had somewhere to go, but because the world called it gently onward. If you could have followed one for a day, you might have realized that its slowness was deceptive. It was not lazy, but efficient. It wasted nothing, not energy, not motion, not time. Every step mattered. Every action was measured against the scale of the earth itself. And perhaps that is why it endured so long. For millions of years, the Glyptodon walked the world unchanged, a perfect design for a perfect role. It was not built for competition, but for coexistence. It lived in the quiet middle ground between fragility and ferocity, a symbol of survival through steadiness. Now, of course, it's gone, its armored shell long buried, its heavy bones sleeping under layers of soil and time. But the earth remembers. The plains still bear the signature of its passing. The plants that once grew in its shadow still carry the rhythm of its grazing. The soil it turned still cradles the seeds of what came after. And if the wind could speak for it, perhaps it would whisper something like this: move slowly but keep moving. Be strong but stay gentle. Shape the world not by force but by persistence. The Glyptodon did not rush, and yet it changed everything. It was the quiet engine of the Pleistocene, the armored gardener of the grasslands, the patient soul of an age defined by extremes. Even now, in the hush between gusts of wind, you might almost hear it, the low, steady thump of feet against ancient ground, the sound of a living tank moving through eternity, unhurried and eternal. There was a time when the earth itself seemed to move, not from quakes or storms, but from the unending tide of hooves. From one horizon to the next, the land rippled with motion, a dark ocean of muscle and breath and sound. The air trembled with the thunder of migration, the deep rolling heartbeat of life on the move. These were the bison and the ancient horses, the great herds of the Pleistocene, the foundation stones of an entire world. They were not the predators, nor the armored titans, nor the solitary rulers of the Ice Age. They were its pulse, the rhythm that sustained everything else. Where they walked, the earth woke. Where they grazed, the grass returned. They were abundance made visible, the eternal cycle of life and nourishment, embodied in fur and hoof. Imagine standing on a windswept steppe 20,000 years ago. The air smells of grass and cold. The sky stretches wide, a blue so vast it humbles thought. And then from the distance, a low vibration begins, a sound that swells until the very ground hums beneath your feet. The herd is coming, thousands upon thousands of bodies, each one moving in perfect unison, their shadows merging into a single living tide. At the front, the bison lead, a wall of power, their great heads lowered, horns glinting like dark crescents. Their shoulders rise like mountains, their breath a fog that mingles with the wind. Their coats are thick, coarse and dusted with frost, built for endurance rather than grace. They tame with a solemn, rolling gait, their hooves drumming the frozen earth. Behind them waves of ancient horses follow, smaller but swifter, their manes rippling like banners of light across the plain. Together, they form the architecture of motion, strength and speed, patience and grace. The bison were the builders of the grasslands. Each step they took pressed seeds into the soil, their hooves churning the ground, aerating it, giving life to new shoots. Their grazing kept the grasses low and fresh, preventing stagnation and allowing sunlight to reach the young plants. When they wallowed in dust or snow, they created hollows, that filled with water after the thaw. Shallow pools where insects gathered, birds nested, and life began again. They were quite literally engineers of the land, shaping entire ecosystems by simply existing. Their bodies were masterpieces of endurance. Their massive shoulders housed muscles strong enough to plow through snowdrifts or tear through tough sedges. Their heads acted as living shovels, swinging side to side to uncover the buried forage beneath ice. Their coats, layered, oily, and dense, kept them alive in winds that could freeze the breath in seconds. Yet for all their strength, they were not feral destroyers. They were caretakers, the quiet gardeners of the tundra, keeping the land in balance. The ancient horses, in turn, were the swift companions of the plains, the wind-embodied, sleek and compact, with limbs sculpted for endless travel. They could run for hours without rest, moving with effortless rhythm across the open steppe. Their herds stretched for miles, each member bound to the others by instinct and memory. They followed the seasons like rivers follow gravity, never aimless, always returning to where the grass grew sweetest and the rivers ran clear. Their hooves struck sparks from the frozen earth, their bodies gleaming in sunlight, their breath pluming in silver arcs. They grazed in patterns that shaped the land, just as surely as the bison did, clipping the tall grasses, spreading seeds through dung, and pressing their trails deep into the soil. Those trails became highways for other life, pathways of fertility and movement that linked entire regions together. Where they moved, predators followed, but that too was balance. The great herds fed more than themselves. They fed the world. Their bodies sustained the hunters. Their migrations determined the rhythm of survival for everything that depended on them. The bison and horse were not just prey. They were the foundation, the source from which the web of life drew strength. Without them, the cycle would have faltered. Their migrations were acts of memory, as much as movement. Each herd followed ancient paths passed down through generations, invisible highways etched into their blood. They remembered the scent of distant valleys, the timing of the rains, the pattern of stars that marked their journey. When one herd began to move, others followed, as if the land itself had called them forth. There was beauty in their motion, but also solemnity. The bison did not gallop unless pressed. They advanced like weather, slow, unstoppable, inevitable. The horses danced around them, darting and weaving, their energy the counterpoint to the bison's weight. Together they formed a symphony of ecology, thunder and whisper, strength and flight. In the heart of the steppe, their lives were simple and sacred. They ate, they moved, they bred, they returned. Yet in that simplicity lay a profound complexity. Their grazing patterns dictated the health of entire regions. Their waste nourished insects, whose presence fed birds, whose droppings enriched the soil anew. Every act, every step, every breath was part of an ancient choreography that linked life to death, decay to rebirth. The bison's presence shaped the climate of the grasslands itself. By trampling snow and compacting soil, they influenced the melting patterns of spring, directing water into new channels. Their trails became rivers of life that flowed not with water but with renewal. The horses, following those same paths, reinforced them, carving the geography of migration into permanence. If you could see the earth from above in those days, you would have seen their movement as a living map, lines of motion etched in frost and dust, connecting one season to the next. And there was humor in their grandeur. Picture a herd of bison in the middle of a windstorm, their thick fur dusted with snow, heads bowed but unbothered, while the smaller horses darted around them like impatient children. The bison stood resolute, grunting softly, as if muttering, "Let it blow, we've seen worse." The horses snorted and stamped, shaking ice from their manes. Between them the storm passed, and the plains returned to silence. Their senses were tuned to the world in ways we can barely comprehend. The bison could smell rain long before it came, could sense subtle shifts in pressure that foretold change. The horses, with their wide-set eyes, saw danger in every flicker of grass. Together, they were the Earth's early warning system, the living barometers of weather and time. Their instinct for survival was not fear, but awareness, a kind of quiet intelligence that kept them one step ahead of disaster. Their social lives were rich, bound by communication and trust. The bison herds were matriarchal, led by experienced females who knew the routes and seasons. The bulls followed during mating season, their deep bellows echoing across the plains, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the bones of the earth. The horses, too, lived in tight bands, small families bound by loyalty and memory, each stallion guarding his group with watchful eyes. These were societies of order, but also of grace. Every movement had purpose. Every choice was collective. When dawn broke across the plains, the herds rose together. The first rays of light struck their backs, turning their breath to gold. The sound of their hooves filled the morning, a deep, steady thunder that seemed less like noise and more like the earth's own pulse resuming after a night's rest. Wherever they went, they carried the promise of sustenance, of continuity. Their migrations shaped the very character of the land. The plains grew strong under their touch. The soil grew rich beneath their tread. They were the stewards of the open world, the unspoken architects of fertility. Without them, the landscape would have fallen still, the grasses overgrown, the balance broken. It was their motion that kept everything alive. In their unity, there was also a lesson about survival. No single bison or horse could endure alone. Their power lay in their togetherness, the collective strength of many hearts moving toward the same horizon. They understood, in a way deeper than thought, that safety, warmth, and purpose came from belonging. Each individual was a note. The herd was the song. To see them in their prime would have been to witness the earth at its most alive. The air filled with the sound of chewing and breathing and hooves. The ground trembled beneath their weight. They were not just creatures, they were continuity itself. Through drought and snow, through generations of change, they carried the essence of endurance. And then, at night, the plains grew still, the herds gathered close, the young sleeping between the adults, bodies pressed for warmth. The stars stretched above them, vast and unbothered, and the wind whispered through the grass like a lullaby. The bison shifted softly, the horses snorted and sighed, and the world for that moment was perfect. Alive, balanced, breathing in rhythm. They did not build, but they shaped. They did not speak, but they sang through their motion. Their story is not one of conquest, but of contribution, a reminder that the foundation of any living system lies not in dominance, but in coexistence. The bison and the ancient horse were not kings or hunters. They were the heartbeat of the plains, the humble giants who carried the weight of the world's fertility on their backs. If you walk the open fields today, you might still sense them. The wind in the grass mimics the whisper of hooves. The dust rising in sunlight carries echoes of their movement. The earth remembers their rhythm, the slow pulse of thousands moving together toward the promise of green horizons. And perhaps if the planet itself could speak of them now, it would murmur softly, almost fondly, "Run, my children. Run not in fear, but in purpose. Carry the land with you. Leave behind life wherever you pass. The world is yours to keep alive." For that was their legacy. Not destruction, not dominance, but balance. The bison and the ancient horse were the breath between seasons, the motion that stitched together the fabric of life. They were the earth's living tide, rising and falling in perfect grace, turning silence into song and grass into eternity. Far away from the thunder of mammoths and the cry of saber-toothed cats, there was another world, quiet, sunburned, and strange, a continent adrift at the edge of time, where evolution moved to its own slow rhythm and the pulse of life beat to a different song. This was Australia, the island of dreams and ghosts, where isolation gave birth to creatures that seemed imagined rather than born. Here the megafauna were unlike any others, marsupial titans, gentle and strange, their power wrapped not in violence, but in wonder. For millions of years, Australia had drifted alone, separated from the great continents of the north. Its creatures evolved in solitude, their stories unwritten by tigers or bears, unshaped by elephants or great wolves. Instead, the land itself sculpted them, its dry winds, its fiery deserts, its sparse and ancient forests, whispering lessons of survival to each new generation. The result was a bestiary of giants that could exist nowhere else on Earth. beings as improbable as the landscape that cradled them, and towering among them all was Diprotodon, the gentle colossus of the southern world. Imagine a wombat, but grown impossibly vast. A creature stretching nearly 4 meters long and weighing close to 3 tons. Diprotodon, Optum, was the largest marsupial to ever walk the earth, a mammal born from the same lineage as koalas and kangaroos, yet magnified to mythic scale. It moved slowly through the eucalyptus woodlands and dry plains, its bulk swaying with each deliberate step. Its skin was thick, its fur coarse, and its wide muzzle flared as it chewed the leaves and shrubs of the ancient Australian bush. Its head, large and rounded, bore calm eyes that seemed to hold the memory of the desert silence. There was no menace in its face, only a deep, tranquil patience, as though it understood the futility of haste. The air around it shimmered with heat, and its shadow stretched across the brittle grass like a moving cloud. It was not an animal that rushed. It lived in the rhythm of drought and rain, its body a vessel of endurance in a land that offered little mercy. Diprotodon's world was one of extremes. The rivers were unreliable, the vegetation sparse, waterholes came and went like mirages, and the land itself shifted color with the seasons, red to gold, gold to dust. Yet Diprotodon thrived here, carrying its slow certainty through ages of change. It was a browser, a feeder on leaves and bark, pulling down branches with powerful forelimbs. Its teeth grew continuously, wearing down against the tough fibers of its food, always renewing, as if time itself flowed through its mouth. And when it moved, the earth listened. Its feet pressed deep into the ground, leaving footprints that hardened into fossils, circles of memory stamped into clay. Thousands of years later, those prints still speak, tracing the paths of herds that wandered through open woodland and across ancient lake shores. Some prints are crossed by smaller ones, calves following mothers, families walking together, the rhythm of care and continuity etched into stone. It was not alone in its reign. Alongside it bounded another of Australia's great enigmas, the short-faced kangaroo, Procoptodon goliath, a creature as bizarre as it was powerful. Standing over 2 meters tall, it was built not for flight, but for command. Its face was shorter and broader than that of modern kangaroos, its jaw strong, its body thick with muscle. Unlike its bounding descendants, Procoptodon walked upright, its posture almost human-like when it moved slowly, its long limbs balancing its immense weight with surprising grace. Where Diprotodon lumbered, Procoptodon strode. Its legs were less for speed and more for strength, its gait steady and deliberate. It could reach high branches, pulling down leaves with clawed hands, its movements precise and economical. It lived in small groups, perhaps families or loose gatherings, scattered across the dry grasslands and open forests that quilted the continent. Its eyes were large, forward-facing, giving it depth of vision, a rare trait in grazers. Perhaps that gaze once fixed on the horizon, scanning for danger or distant rain. Its nostrils flared to catch scents carried by the hot wind. It was a creature built for dryness, for endurance, for waiting. Its every motion seemed to echo the land's ancient patience. Both Diprotodon and Procoptodon were children of a continent that had learned to survive without abundance. Their slow pace, their size, their diets, all were answers to the riddle of scarcity. In a place where water hid and food came grudgingly, they evolved into living reservoirs. Their bulk stored moisture and energy, their calm conserved life itself. They were massive, not out of extravagance, but necessity. The land they shaped was quiet, but alive with subtle change. As they fed, they broke branches, opened gaps in the vegetation, and allowed sunlight to touch the soil. In those patches, new plants grew, spreading through the trails left by the giants' feet. Their dung enriched the arid ground, carrying seeds across distances too great for wind alone. Each step of a Diprotodon was a promise of renewal. Each pause of a Procoptodon left behind the potential for growth. To the human eye, they must have seemed like myths made real, their silhouettes massive against the dawn, their movements slow and deliberate, as if time itself had thickened around them. When early people first walked this land, they would have seen Diprotodon grazing among sparse trees, or Procoptodon standing tall in the twilight, ears twitching, its shadow stretching long and still. These giants must have seemed eternal, ancient as the rocks, immovable as the horizon. And yet, even in their grandeur, there was fragility. The very qualities that made them masters of endurance, slowness, calm, consistency, were also what bound them to the edge of change. When the climate grew drier, when the rains faltered, when the vegetation thinned, the rhythm of their world began to falter. Still, for a time, they endured. Diprotodon would wander between shrinking waterholes, its broad feet carrying it across cracked mudflats. Procoptodon would browse among tough, wiry shrubs that clung stubbornly to the dry ground. Their patience was immense, their resilience nearly absolute. They had survived countless droughts before. Surely the land would turn kind again. Surely the rain would return. There is something haunting about imagining them in those final centuries, the last herds, still walking the same ancestral routes, still trusting the seasons that once guided their lives. The sky above them burned with heat, the air shimmered with dust, yet they kept moving, their instinct older than despair. Perhaps mothers still led their young to waterholes remembered from generations past, only to find them dry. Perhaps the great bulls still bellowed softly in the dusk, calling to others that no longer came, and always the continent watched in silence. Australia had shaped them, and now it tested them. The isolation that had once protected them, keeping out the predators and diseases of other lands, became a kind of cage. There was no new refuge, no greener plain across the sea. They were bound to the fate of their island, their story woven inseparably into its dust. The beauty of their existence lies in its stillness. They were creatures of slow time, beings that taught the land how to breathe. Each Diprotodon was a moving mountain, each Protoboton a sentinel of patience. Together they embodied the spirit of Australia itself, ancient, stoic, enduring, and full of mystery. Even now, their bones tell quiet stories. In the dry heart of the continent, pale shapes emerge from riverbeds and caves. Skulls the size of boulders, teeth worn smooth by ages of chewing, footprints preserved in hardened clay. They are fossils, yes, but more than that, they are the echoes of a forgotten peace, reminders of a world where life moved at the pace of wind and stone. And when the desert wind blows, carrying red dust across the plains, it is easy to imagine them still there, slow forms moving through the heat haze, their shadows long and blurred, their footsteps merging with the earth's ancient heartbeat. The land remembers them. The silence remembers them. Diprotodon and Procoptodon were never conquerors, never hunters, never kings. They were the steady breath of an island continent, the quiet custodians of its balance. They shaped their world not with claws or teeth, but with weight, patience, and presence. In their gentleness was power, in their endurance, majesty. Perhaps if the earth could whisper to them now, it would say what it once told all its giants. You walked slowly, and that was enough. You carried time with you. You fed the land with your calm. You lived as the sun lives quietly, completely until the light changed. And in that whisper lies their truth. The giants of Australia did not vanish in rage or catastrophe. They simply faded as dreams fade with dawn. Their footsteps sank into dust. Their shadows folded into the heat. And the island, ever secretive, kept their memory safe beneath layers of silence and sand. They were the isolated giants, born of separation, sustained by endurance, gone too soon. Yet in every gust of dry wind, in every whispering gum tree, there lingers a trace of them, the patient weight of ancient footsteps, the slow grace of life that once ruled a continent apart. The end did not come in a single night of fire or thunder. There was no great storm that swept the world clean, no comet that turned the sky to glass. The giants of earth, the mammoths, the mastodons, the bears, the wolves, the sloths, and all their kin, did not fall in one moment. Their extinction was quieter than that. It was a slow unraveling, a fading of voices, a long dusk that settled over millennia. And yet it was no less tragic, for its silence. The Ice Age began to die, as all ages do. The world warmed almost imperceptibly at first. The glaciers retreated, inch by inch, bleeding their cold hearts into rivers that surged across the continents. The sea, long locked in ice, began to rise again, licking at the edges of ancient valleys. Forests crept northward. The tundra melted into mud, and the open grasslands that had fed the great herds shrank like the breath of a dying season. The rhythm of the earth changed, and with it, everything that had depended on the old pulse began to stumble. For hundreds of thousands of years, the giants had been masters of their domains, creatures perfectly tuned to the cold precision of the Pleistocene. Thick fur, great size, slow metabolism, steady migration, all were gifts shaped by ice and snow. But when the warmth came, those gifts became burdens. What once protected them now confined them. The same bodies that had endured blizzards now struggled under the weight of heat. The same diets that had thrived on steppe grass could no longer find enough to sustain them in forests thick with trees and shadow. The grasslands, those vast seas of green that had stretched from one horizon to the next, began to fragment. Pockets of fertile land remained, but the great migrations faltered. The herds that once moved like waves across continents now found themselves hemmed in by forests, wetlands, and rising waters. Their ancient trails disappeared under roots and mud. The bison and horses that had shaped the plains lost the endless space they needed. The mammoths and mastodons lost the open tundras that had once been their cradle. And as the ice retreated, the climate grew restless. Seasons shifted unpredictably. Rains came too soon, or not at all. The earth caught between the cold it was leaving and the warmth it had not yet learned to balance, trembled. Plants changed their timing. Blooms arrived early or late. Grasses grew where they never had, and vanished where they once flourished. The harmony between herbivore and vegetation faltered. Hunger followed. But climate was only part of the story. For the first time in their long history, the giants faced a new and clever predator, one unlike any they had ever known. Humans had been there for a while, at first only a whisper on the edge of the wilderness. Small, fragile, few in number, but they carried something the giants did not fire: tools and the endless curiosity of a mind that planned. They learned the habits of their towering neighbors, where they fed, when they traveled, how they rested. A single human with a spear was nothing. A tribe with patience and cooperation was everything. They stalked the slow, the weak, the unguarded. They followed herds over long distances, cutting into the rhythm of migration. They burned patches of forest to drive prey into open ground, reshaping the land with flame. At first, the balance held. The earth was vast, the giants many. But as human populations grew and their hunting tools sharpened, spear points of stone, then bone, then flint, the scales began to tilt. The hunts were no longer for survival alone, but for mastery. Each successful kill fed more mouths, taught more hunters, encouraged more ambition. The giants, slow to breed, could not keep pace with the speed of human ingenuity. In the twilight of the Ice Age, there were still herds moving across the plains, still shadows of mammoths beneath the moon. But they were fewer now. Where once the tundra trembled beneath their weight, the land began to fall silent. Fossils tell the story in gaps, centuries where numbers dropped, regions where bones vanish entirely. The world was losing its large heartbeat, and no one at the time could have known what it meant. The combination of warmth and hunger was merciless. As grasslands turned to forests, prey animals vanished, and with them, the predators who depended on them. Wolves grew leaner, bears more desperate, and those that had fed on the fallen, scavengers and insects alike, found their banquet table empty. When one giant fell, the balance of hundreds of smaller lives fell with it. The extinction was not a single death, but a cascade, a collapse of relationships that had taken millions of years to form. The genetic fabric of the giants began to fray long before the final blow. As habitats shrank, so did populations. Isolated groups became trapped in shrinking pockets of land, valleys cut off by new rivers, forests divided by warming plains. Inbreeding followed, and with it, weakness. Each generation carried fewer variations, fewer defenses against change. Genetic drift eroded the diversity that had once allowed them to adapt. Disease struck harder, fertility waned, and the young did not thrive as they once had. What had been resilience became fragility. The mighty bodies of the megafauna, the symbols of their strength, could no longer protect them from the subtle poisons of isolation. Their numbers dwindled until each species teetered on the edge of collapse, vulnerable to every shift in weather, every spark of human fire. And then came the dominoes. When the grazers vanished, the grass grew tall and dry, fueling wildfires that swept unchecked across the land. When the forests expanded into their absence, they altered rainfall patterns, creating drought where once there had been abundance. The predators who had followed the herds starved or fled, and the scavengers lost their sustenance. The Earth's web of life tightened. The extinction of the megafauna was not a single story, but a chorus of endings. In the north, the mammoths dwindled with the melting of the tundra. In the west, the great bison herds vanished from the plains. In every corner of the world, the song was the same: warmth, hunger, and silence. It was not violence that ended them, but imbalance, a tipping of the scales that had once held the wild in harmony. For every species that vanished, the world changed a little. The grass grew differently. The soil breathed differently. Even the winds shifted, carrying new seeds to places they had never belonged. Life adapted, as it always does, but the shape of that life was forever altered. The earth became quieter, smaller, lighter in its steps. And yet, in the midst of tragedy, there was also transformation. The end of the giants made room for something new. As the last mammoth fell, the first civilizations began to rise. As the last bison herds thinned, the grasslands became farmland. Humanity, unknowing, stepped into the space left behind. The extinction of the megafauna was both an ending and a beginning, the closing of one chapter, the reluctant dawn of another. Still, the loss left an ache in the world, a hollow echo that no abundance of small creatures could fill. The earth had once known weight, literal, living mass that pressed against its surface like the slow pulse of eternity. Now that weight was gone, and the planet felt a little lighter, a little lonelier. The tundra no longer thundered. The forests no longer shook with the tread of enormous feet. Some of the last survivors clung to isolated refuges for a time, mammoths on Arctic islands, sloths in hidden valleys. But even these final whispers faded. The climate continued to warm, the seas continued to rise, and humanity's reach grew longer with each passing century. When the last of the giants fell, the earth exhaled, a long, weary sigh of change. Science can tell us much about why they disappeared. Isotopes in bones, pollen trapped in ice cores, ancient fire scars in the soil. We can trace their decline in data, in the sediments of time. But there is another truth, one that belongs less to numbers than to memory. The giants vanished because the world shifted too quickly for them to follow. They had lived in balance with a steady earth, and when that balance broke, so did their story. It is tempting to imagine their extinction as inevitable, a footnote in evolution's long tale. But perhaps inevitability is just another word for unawareness. The warming was natural, but the fires, the hunts, the unrelenting expansion of human curiosity, they were not. The megafauna were victims of both the planet's rhythm and our own ambition. The earth, for all its age, is fragile in its balances. The giants knew that balance by instinct. They grazed only what they needed. They moved with the seasons. They lived within the circle of renewals. But humanity, with its cleverness and hunger for more, broke that circle before it understood what it had done. And the result was silence, a silence that still hums faintly beneath the soil, beneath the roar of modern life, beneath our own restless hearts. If the earth could speak of that time, it might whisper with sorrow, they were too large for the world that was coming, and too slow for the fires that followed. The giants fell not because they were weak, but because the world itself changed faster than they could dream. They were the embodiment of an age that believed in endurance, and endurance was no longer enough. And yet, even in their absence, they remain. The soil holds their bones, the rivers trace their paths, and the grasses still grow on the plains they once shaped. They are gone, but their fingerprints are everywhere, in the balance of ecosystems that still echo their passing, in the memory of our species that once hunted them, in the quiet awe we still feel when we imagine them walking beneath the cold sun. Their extinction was a tragedy, yes, but also a lesson, the reminder that nothing, however vast or powerful, stands apart from change. The world moves on, ice melts, grasslands fade. Even the greatest hearts must yield to time. If you close your eyes and listen, perhaps you can still hear them. The fading thunder of hooves, the low rumble of herds across vanished plains, the sigh of wind across the bones of a frozen age. They are gone but not lost. They live in the rhythm of the earth's renewal, in the fragile balance that still turns beneath our feet. And perhaps if the earth could murmur one final benediction for them, it would be this: rest now, my giants. You shaped me, and I will remember. The warmth took your bodies, but your stories endure. Long after the last giant fell silent, the earth continued to whisper their stories. The winds swept over plains that once trembled beneath their steps, and the mountains watched, unmoved as time buried their bones. But nothing on this planet truly disappeared. The great creatures of the Ice Age, those immense architects of the living world, did not vanish into nothingness. They left behind traces, messages carved not in words but in stone, bone, and memory. Their legacy lies beneath our feet and within our minds, a quiet inheritance of strength, fragility, and awe. The first storytellers of that legacy were not poets or historians, but geologic time itself, in the deep beds of ancient lakes, in the frozen layers of Arctic soil, and in the shadowed mouths of caves. The bones of giants waited, fossils, the preserved shapes of what once was, a time-zone script, written in calcium and sediment. Each fossilized tusk, each footprint impressed in mud and turned to stone, is a syllable in the Earth's great story. From them we learn what no living witness could tell. The grooves worn into a mammoth's molars speak of the grasses it chewed, the harshness of its winters, the rhythm of its migrations, the curve of a rib, the angle of a femur, the scars on a skull. All are evidence of life lived, of struggle and adaptation. Some bones bear the marks of healing, proof that even the giants knew pain and recovery. Others show the deep cuts of human tools, the first written evidence of encounter between our kind and theirs. In the permafrost, the great frozen library of the North, time's handwriting becomes astonishingly clear. There, under layers of ice, untouched for tens of thousands of years, DNA sleeps like a memory waiting to be awakened. Within it lies the blueprint of vanished worlds, the sequence of genes that built the mammoth's wool, the bison's endurance, the saber's blade. Scientists, reading these codes, can now glimpse life, not as myth but as molecular truth. The bloodlines of the past speak through the language of adenine and guanine, as precise and elegant as any song. Each strand of DNA preserved in ice or bone is more than data. It is the echo of a breath, the remnant of a heartbeat. The woolly mammoth's genes tell us not only how it lived, but what it faced. Adaptations to cold, changes in diet, the slow tightening of genetic diversity as populations dwindled. It is as if the dead are still whispering their stories through chemistry, teaching us how life endures and how it fades. And yet, not all their legacy lies buried. Some of it lives in light and pigment, in the art of those who once stood beside them. In the caves of France and Spain, on walls dimly lit by flickering firelight, humans painted the shapes of giants, the broad backs of bison, the sweeping tusks of mammoths, the curved horns of ancient bulls. These images, tens of thousands of years old, are not mere decorations, they are dialogues between species. When early humans painted those creatures, they were not drawing from imagination but from memory. They had seen them, hunted them, followed their herds across the plains. The paintings are both reverence and remembrance, a way of saying, we saw you, we knew you, we depended on you. Each line of ochre and charcoal is an act of witness. The caves became cathedrals of stone, their walls a scripture of life shared between hunter and hunted. In those dark chambers, under flickering flame, the first artists honored the giants, not as beasts, but as companions in existence. The animals filled their world with motion and meaning, and the humans in turn filled the stone with gratitude. Even now, when we gaze at those ancient images, we can almost feel the pulse of that relationship, the acknowledgement that life was vast, interconnected, and sacred. From such encounters also came myth. Long after the giants were gone, their bones continued to surface from the ground. Massive femurs and skulls that no one could recognize. To the eyes of early farmers and philosophers, they seemed too large to belong to any known creature. Thus were legends born. In Greece, shepherds found skulls with large central holes, remnants of ancient elephants or mammoths, and believed them to be the heads of one-eyed giants. They called them cyclopes, beings of immense strength who forged thunder for the gods. In these myths we hear not ignorance, but wonder. The human instinct to explain, to connect the past to the imagination. Even mistaken, they honored the truth that the earth once held giants. Across the world, in different languages and landscapes, similar tales arose. Bones of strange, long-dead creatures became the remains of dragons, ogres, and titans. Humanity's mythic memory was a kind of archaeology of the soul, a way of making sense of what had been lost, of feeling awe in the face of the incomprehensible. But the legacy of the megafauna is not only found in stone or story, it is etched into our own evolution. The first humans who hunted the great beasts learned more than how to survive. They learned how to cooperate. To bring down an animal that weighed several tons required communication, planning, courage, and trust. It required social bonds strong enough to hold through danger, and imaginations vivid enough to predict what might happen next. From those hunts were born the skills that would shape civilization itself. Strategy, empathy, foresight, these were tools as vital as the spear. In the chase of the mammoth, humans learned the art of shared intention, the delicate balance between risk and reward. And from that learning grew language, storytelling, and eventually culture. The giants, in their own way, were our first teachers. As we hunted them, we also became more like them, adaptive, enduring, capable of shaping the land around us. When the Ice Age ended and the herds were gone, we carried their lessons forward. The instinct to follow migration became the pattern of agriculture. The understanding of seasonal cycles became the foundation of timekeeping. We built our first societies on the bones of the world they left behind. Even the landscapes they once ruled still bear their signature. The grasslands that spread under their hooves remain fertile because they once grazed there. The forests they thinned, the trails they carved, the waterways they crossed, these shaped the geography that humanity inherited. Our civilizations grew from the soil they enriched. Every field that feeds us is in some distant way a gift of the giants who trampled it before us. And in the fossils we now unearth, we find not just their remains but a mirror. The bones are reminders of impermanence, of the truth that no species, no matter how mighty, escapes the turning of time. They tell us that strength alone is not survival, and that even the most resilient life can vanish if the balance shifts too far. The mammoth's tusk, the bison's skull, the sloth's claw, all whisper the same quiet warning. Size is no protection against change. It is a humbling thought. For all our cities and machines, we are no less part of nature's story than they were. We too are bound to the cycles of climate, to the fragility of ecosystems, to the finite patience of the earth. The giants remind us of what happens when the pace of change outruns the pace of adaptation. Yet, their legacy is not despair, it is wisdom. They show us that the measure of greatness is not only in power, but in coexistence. The giants did not dominate their world through conquest. They shaped it through rhythm and restraint. They lived within limits. They gave as they took. In their rise and fall lies a lesson we still struggle to learn, that balance, not size, sustains life. When scientists kneel over a fragment of bone, or when artists paint the shapes of vanished beasts, they are continuing an ancient dialogue, a conversation between humanity and the rest of existence. Every fossil uncovered is a question asked of time. Every strand of DNA sequenced is an answer whispered back. The earth keeps speaking through its remnants, and our role is to listen. The giants' cultural memory also lingers in our collective imagination. They appear in our dreams and stories still. Mammoths in children's books, great sloths in museum halls, immense herds resurrected in the glowing light of screen. Even now we feel a strange nostalgia for a world we never knew. It is as though some deep part of our species remembers standing beside creatures that made us feel small, and in that smallness taught us reverence. Their bones remind us of our own beginnings. Their art reminds us of our capacity for wonder. Their DNA reminds us that life is continuity, that every end carries the seeds of a new beginning. We carry their legacy, not in fossils or myths alone, but in our curiosity, our creativity, our desire to understand what came before. If the earth could speak of its children, it might say that the giants were its boldest experiment, and that humanity was its most self-aware. And somewhere between those two extremes, between endurance and imagination, lies the story of life itself. When we look upon the fossils of the megafauna, we are not merely studying the past, we are reading a letter written to the future. It says, "Remember, you too are part of the pattern. Learn from those who came before you. Size and strength are fleeting. Connection endures." The first humans learned that lesson by necessity, by hunting together, sharing food, painting gratitude onto stone. We, their descendants, must learn it again, in a different form, through science, through care, through humility. The earth has given us knowledge enough to understand what was lost. What we do with that understanding is the true measure of whether we have learned. And so, when you next see a fossil behind glass, or a cave painting in a book, pause for a moment. Imagine the creature that bone once held, the warmth that skin once knew, the breath that once turned winter air to steam. Imagine the hands that painted it, the eyes that watched it walk into the dusk. They are all speaking still. The giants, the artists, the earth itself. Their voices mingle in the quiet language of memory, saying only, "Remember what we were. Remember what we taught you." Strength fades, but understanding endures. For in the end, their greatest gift was not their size or their majesty. It was their reminder of what it means to live within the earth, not above it. Their fossils are not just relics. They are lessons, encoded in stone and spirit alike. The giants are gone, but their story is written into ours, as surely as bones into the bedrock. And if you listen closely beyond the hum of the present world, you might hear it still, faint but unwavering, the echo of deep time whispering, "Do not forget, the earth remembers you too." And so, as the last echoes of thunder fade, and the footprints of giants sink beneath the snow of time, we come to rest at the quiet edge of the Ice Age's long dream. For hundreds of thousands of years, the earth carried them, mammoths and mastodons, dire wolves and sloths, rhinos and bison, the living chorus of a colder, wilder world. They rose, flourished and vanished, leaving behind not emptiness, but understanding. The giants once ruled the tundra, the plains, and the forests. Their weight shaped rivers, their hunger sculpted grasslands, their passing carved lessons into the bones of the earth itself. And now, only their shadows remain, woven into the soil, the fossils, the stories we tell to remember how vast the world once felt. They teach us still, these ancient beings, even in silence. They remind us that greatness is not permanent, that strength bends before change, and that the pulse of life beats not in size, but in harmony. The mammoth's tusks, the wolf's howl, the rhino's tread, each was once a verse in the planet's long poem of adaptation and balance. When the ice melted, the verses changed, but the song continued. Their story is not one of loss alone. It is a mirror held up to our own reflection, for now we are the giants. We fill the continents with our motion, shape the air and oceans with our choices. Like them, we stride across the fragile skin of earth, believing ourselves eternal. But the giants remind us, gently and clearly, no power endures without respect for balance. The world that nurtures us can just as easily withdraw its hand. In their rise, we see creation's splendor. In their fall, we see its warning. And in their memory, perhaps we find the wisdom to slow down, to listen again to the rhythm beneath our feet, the heartbeat of a planet older than any dream. So now, as the night deepens and the hum of the modern world quiets, imagine for a moment that you are standing where they once stood. Snow drifts softly over an ancient plain. The air is still, except for the distant groan of shifting ice. In the twilight, a shadow moves, broad, gentle, magnificent. A woolly mammoth walks slowly through the cold, its breath clouding like smoke, its footsteps steady as the turning of time. It does not hurry. It does not fear. It simply moves forward, carrying the memory of all that was and all that will be. The earth still whispers through that image, soft as a lullaby. Remember them not as relics, but as reminders. Remember the balance. Remember the grace of slow endurance. So breathe deeply. Let the cold air of imagination settle in your chest. The giants are gone, but their calm remains. Their story drifts through you now, a quiet current beneath the noise of life. Sleep well, traveler. Dream of the frozen plains, of silver light on snow, of mammoths walking through the mist. Dream of a world vast and untamed, where every breath was a prayer of balance, every creature a note in nature's song. And when morning comes, carry that stillness with you. For the earth is still whispering, as it always has. Live gently, walk wisely, remember the giant. If this journey through deep time has moved you, if it left you curious, or quiet, or full of wonder, leave a small trace of your own. Share, like, or simply breathe it forward, so the story continues. Good night, dear listener. May your dreams wander softly through the age of ice, and may the earth's ancient lullaby guide you home.